The Central Kerbin Alliance Network has brazenly begun deploying its PGM-19 dual missiles on the border of Communist territory. These medium-range ballistic missiles threaten all of Communist territory. Now, with the island nation of Cuba joining the Communist pack, the Communists can also threaten the heartland of CKAN territory. I am Echo 3, and let's continue discussing the Cold War. As the CKAN threat looms, the Communists must aggressively patrol their own waters. The Kerbirov-class destroyers have been a consistent workhorse of the Communist Navy, but it's time to develop a new class of destroyer, one that will be better able to meet the threats of the present day. This new Kerbirov class will be larger, faster, and more heavily armed than its predecessor. And one of the most significant changes is the much larger electrical capacity of these new destroyers. This will enable the ship to operate independently for long periods of time. The mod I'm using to change these fuel tanks into batteries is called Configurable Containers. And if you like building ships and submarines, the mod, the Life Aquatic, actually gives a purpose to those types of crafts. Auto struts are used to strengthen the connection between many of the pieces. These engines for use in the water only require electricity to run, so with some form of power generation, like solar panels or nuclear reactors, the ship could run indefinitely. The ship's primary purpose will be to engage enemy aircraft. Therefore, it will need the latest generation of radar. The Kerbirov will use the same dual-purpose gun that was on the Kerbgrad. This 100mm cannon can engage surface targets as well as aircraft. Mounted over top the KS-19 will be the missile turret. On the rear of the ship, the close-in weapon system will be mounted. The CIWS uses a special type of 30mm ammunition. Therefore, these universal ammo boxes need to be loaded with the correct type of ammunition. The ship will also include the latest generation of short-range anti-aircraft missile. The K-13 is an infrared homing missile. Basically, it's an exact copy of the CKAN's AIM-9 missile. There's a bit of a funny story behind the development of the Communist infrared homing missile. The Central Kerbin Alliance Network fired one of their AIM-9 missiles at a Communist airplane, but the missile failed to detonate. So when the plane landed, Communist engineers were able to reverse engineer the missile and develop the Communist-owned version of it. Now that the ship is complete, it's time to take it out on its Shakedown Cruise. Lieutenant Commander Arblis Kerman waits on the dock to join the ship. The Lieutenant Commander is excited to captain this new ship. She's excited to test out the capabilities of the new Kerbirov ship. The Kerbirov has a slick shape and promises to be extremely fast. The Lieutenant Commander climbs on board and quickly heads to the bridge. Once on board, she is met by famed pilot Yuri Kerman. The powerful engine is activated, and the ship sets sail. The Shakedown Cruise will involve sailing to 3 different points, although they are all still fairly close to port. If all of the systems check out, the ship will then be deployed to Cuba. The Central Kerbin Alliance Network is not happy with having a communist nation right in their backyard. Intelligence personnel believe that the Central Kerbin Alliance Network even attempted to overthrow the newly established communist government. Even though the CKAN plot to overthrow the government failed, the Communist pack will need to help bolster the defenses of this new nation. The island is also a prime location for a communist ballistic missile base. Since the Central Kerbin Alliance Network is deploying their ballistic missiles right on the border of communist territory, why shouldn't the communists respond in kind? The Shakedown Cruise has gone very well. The ship will now be making its way to Cuba, where she will stand guard against CKAN aggression. As the ship begins making its way to Cuba, a new emergency has come up. A communist Kerbinaut is stranded in orbit. A rescue mission is hastily planned. The reliable KV-2 pod will be used for this mission. It is equipped with 2 seats, one for the pilot and one for the stranded Kerbal. The pod is great for re-entry, but it isn't very aerodynamic, so it's best to put it into a fairing. The Kodiak has great performance in the atmosphere, but no gimbaling, so fins are added for control during the ascent. And now, the Kostov is ready for launch. Its powerful engines quickly accelerate it through the lower atmosphere. The stranded Kerbal is in a lower inclination than the launch site. Therefore, a series of maneuvers will be required in order to rendezvous with the stranded Kerbal. The first stage has propelled the craft to over 1,500 meters per second and 50 kilometers in altitude. This should leave the second stage with plenty of delta V for getting into orbit and to maneuver to the stranded Kerbal. This second stage doesn't have a very powerful engine, but the spark engine is very light. The upper stage has accelerated the craft up to near orbital velocity and an apoapsis over 75 kilometers. Near the apoapsis, the craft will perform its orbital insertion burn. This is being timed so that the craft will rendezvous with the stranded Kerbal on its second orbit. Some say that it's important to match the inclination of the target before attempting an orbital rendezvous. However, that is not necessarily the case. For a skilled pilot, Yuri Kerman, he will finish matching the inclination with the stranded Kerbal as he approaches him. As Yuri comes to within about 1 minute of closest approach, he begins performing his maneuvers. A useful tip for orbital rendezvous is to burn on the target side of the retrograde marker, or as in the case of Yuri, he is burning directly in between the retrograde marker and the target marker. This will simultaneously decrease the separation and the orbital velocity difference. Now that the two crafts are relatively close, the stranded Kerbal gets out of his and makes his way on EVA towards Yuri. A Kerbal's EVA pack has about 600 meters per second of delta V, so if needed, they can perform some very long EVA missions. With the Kerbal now safely on board, Yuri begins plotting his re-entry burn. He would like to land in the desert near the Communist Space Center. If the crew were to land in Central Kerbin Alliance territory, they may never be given the chance to return home. But Yuri has accurately calculated his re-entry burn and will land safely in the middle of Communist territory. Well, it will be safely in Communist territory. Whether his landing itself will actually be safe is yet to be determined. The KV series of re-entry pods has a reliable record, and Yuri is not worried. The craft descends past 5,000 meters and the chute opens. At just under 1,000 meters, the chute fully deploys. Another successful mission by Yuri Kerman. Over at the Central Kerbin Alliance Network Space Center, D.D. Kerman takes off in the new K-5 fighter. He is being sent on a reconnaissance mission to fly over Cuba and see if the reports of communist missile batteries there are true. That's not a bomb underneath his plane, it's a camera. This is not an attack mission, just a reconnaissance mission. But to complete his mission, he will have to enter Kuban Airspace. He is attempting to fly low, below radar altitude, but this will make him vulnerable to ground fire. D.D. has turned on his camera and is attempting to find proof of the communist ballistic missiles. D.D. is now only a few kilometers out and has entered Kuban Airspace. Vigilant island defenders have spotted D.D.'s fighter. While D.D. has avoided detection from radar, he has not avoided it from the old-fashioned Mark I eyeball. D.D. flies in low and slow as he tries to get visual confirmation of the missile battery. D.D. spots what looks like the ballistic missile launcher and flies in towards it. He points the aircraft to fly right over the launcher and begins finagling with the camera controls. While looking at his instrument panel, D.D. has failed to notice the observant defenders. Communist AAA fire showers D.D.'s aircraft. The brave communist defenders are quick and accurate. As D.D. attempts to accelerate away, he loses an engine, and now part of his elevator. His ejection system has failed. D.D. attempts to fly away, but the defenders aren't giving up. D.D. has lost too much speed and can't avoid their fire. The defenders shoot off his vertical stabilizer. He spins and crashes into the water. D.D.'s alive, but stranded in the waters just off the coast of Cuba. How will both sides respond? I am Echo 3, and thanks for joining me to discuss the Cold War. I will see you next time.